Damien fell in love with a female college student. He forced me to divorce him. Elysia, she doesn't covet my money. She just wants a proper status and I have to give it to her. We had been in love for 7 years, from our school days to getting married. I married him when he was at his poorest. Now that he has achieved success and fame, he thinks that I'm not as young and beautiful as that young girl. He said that whenever he saw me, it would remind him of the hard days when we couldn't afford food or rent a house, and he said that I was a disgrace in his glorious life. Unlike that female college student, who always looked at him with admiration in her eyes and made him feel fresh and excited every night. Later, he got his wish and divorced me, but then he regretted it. On the day I divorced Damien, at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I saw Delilah for the first time. She was in her early 20s, youthful and beautiful. The way she smiled was very much like how I was in college. Seeing us come out, she threw herself into Damien's arms like a cheerful little rabbit and affectionately held his arm. Damien nervously supported her. "Naughty girl, be careful of your belly." She smiled and stuck out her tongue playfully. Damien had no way to deal with her and reached out to pinch her face full of collagen. Delilah pretended to just notice me and shyly pulled down Damien's hand. "Stop it. There are people around." After the divorce, Damien didn't hide it anymore and told me directly, "Delilah is pregnant. We plan to get our marriage certificate today." I glanced at Delilah's belly, clenched the divorce certificate in my hand, and ignored him. Delilah quickly took out a box of wedding candies from her bag and stuffed them into my hand, smiling innocently and saying, "This is the first box of wedding candies we're giving out. Sister, share our happiness too. I sincerely wish you find happiness as soon as possible." She held Damien's arm tightly and thanked me. "Also, thank you, sister, for training Damien to be so nice these years, so considerate and good at taking care of people. I'll cherish him well. Sister, if you don't mind, let's add each other on WeChat. It's my first pregnancy and I'm inexperienced in many things. I want to consult you." Damien wanted to stop it and didn't want us to have any contact. I just wanted to annoy him, so I added Delilah as a friend right in front of him. Damien was worried and deliberately sent me a message to warn me. "Elysia, if you're angry, take it out on me. But Delilah is innocent and kind, and she's pregnant. Don't hurt her." I calmly left the two of them behind me. Damien and I had been in love for 7 years. When we were at our poorest, we ate steamed buns for 2 months because we couldn't afford other food, and we also slept in the railway station because we couldn't rent a house. But those were the years when we loved each other the most. Later, after our business venture was successful, people around him began to flatter him, and Damien gradually became conceited. Every time there was a company meeting and discussion, as long as I raised objections, even if they were right, he would think that I was deliberately trying to embarrass him. Just because I had seen him at his most down and out, he denied everything about me and insisted that I looked down on him. Gradually, we grew estranged. Until that night, he had drunk a lot at a business dinner. When he got home, he randomly pulled off my nightgown and pushed me onto the bed to kiss me. We hadn't made love for a long time. I couldn't resist his passion and soon softened in his arms, but just when we were about to reach the climax, he hugged me tightly and blurted out, "Delilah." It seemed that the blood in my whole body froze instantly, and my heart felt as if it had been hit hard by a hammer. Damien also lost his passion. He rolled over and sat on the edge of the bed with his back to me. The room was dark as the lights were off. There was a suffocating silence in the air. I looked at the dark ceiling, and tears flowed silently. "Elysia." I don't know how long it had passed. After putting out the last cigarette, Damien said, "Let's get divorced. I'm tired of the fat on your belly, tired of your hair all over the bed. And the perfume on you, it's always the same one. Even if you're not tired of it, I'm sick of the smell." He laid his cards on the table. "Now when I touch you, it's like touching myself. But she's different. She makes me feel fresh and exciting. I don't want to put up with this anymore. You can set any conditions for the divorce, and I'll try my best to meet them as long as you're willing to let us be together." Damien moved out of the house that night. I argued, made a scene, and struggled. But it was all in vain. He was determined to abandon me and our daughter. The only bit of conscience he had left was that considering our daughter was only 3.5 years old, he couldn't bear to tell her the truth. For the time being, we just told her that Dad had gone to work in another city. However, less than half a year after the divorce, our daughter always pestered me, asking for Dad and shouting for him to come home and live with us. That night, while I wasn't paying attention, my daughter secretly took my mobile phone and made a video call to Damien. After the video was connected, she happily shouted, "Dad." But it was Delilah who answered. She greeted my daughter enthusiastically in the video. "Hello, Pearl." My daughter asked coldly, "Who are you? Why is my dad's phone with you?" She said with a smile, "I'm your dad's." "Pearl." I suddenly shouted and cut off Delilah's words, then I snatched the phone from my daughter's hand and hung up the video directly, which scared her to cry. I squatted down, hugged her with heartache and guilt. "Sorry, it's all Mom's fault. Mom scared Pearl. Mom apologizes to you." Pearl cried all night. Finally, she fell asleep in my arms, sobbing, with her little hand tightly grabbing the corner of my clothes, as if she was afraid of being abandoned by me. I looked at her innocent little face and was so sad that I couldn't fall asleep. But as soon as I opened my mobile phone, I saw Delilah's latest WeChat Moments update. "Damien, happy first anniversary of our relationship. Thank you for your love and company. I'm so happy. Looking forward to our family of 3. Love you." I clicked on the photo below the text. In the photo, Damien was holding Delilah's hand. On her ring finger, there was a huge diamond ring. We used to have such happy and sweet moments too. When the company signed its first order, he took me to a jewelry store and insisted on giving me a big diamond ring. But I was reluctant to spend so much money, so in the end, I only chose a small diamond ring with 0.3 carats. That day, we walked out of the shopping mall hand in hand. I raised the hand with the diamond ring towards the morning sun and looked at the sun through my fingers. Although the 0.3 carat diamond was small, it still sparkled in the sunlight. Damien held my hands tightly and promised me, "Elysia, in the future, I will definitely let you live a good life and will never let you regret choosing me." But Damien, you broke your promise. The next day, people in the company were privately discussing how many carats the diamond ring on Delilah's hand was. Wherever I went, someone would look at me with strange eyes. My best friend pulled me into the pantry and cursed Delilah for being shameless, and she also said, "You should have made Damien leave the house with nothing and taken over the company." I made myself a cup of coffee and said calmly, "Damien isn't stupid. He gave me the house, the car, the savings, and our daughter. That means he wants to keep the company. Otherwise, what would he use to support Delilah?" "But Elysia, do you know what people in the company are saying behind your back? They say that you're unwilling to be abandoned and are shamelessly staying here just to win him back." Through the glass of the pantry, I looked at those people in the office area, and they immediately lowered their heads and pretended to be working. What they said isn't wrong either. I am unwilling. Why was it me who accompanied Damien through hardships? Delilah just came and enjoys the fruits of our efforts. Why does her child have a father while my daughter has become a single-parent child? But what do I want that scoundrel for? What I want is his company, everything he's proud of. For this, I can spare no effort. In the afternoon, I took some documents to Damien's office for him to sign. After signing, he handed the documents back to me and said, "Elysia, I'm sorry about the video last night. Delilah was thoughtless. Is Pearl okay?" I held the documents in my arms. "Pearl is fine." Perhaps because of a sense of guilt, Damien's attitude towards me was much better after the divorce. He wasn't as hostile as before. He looked at the black dress I was wearing, which perfectly showed off my waistline. "You've lost a lot of weight. The dress looks great on you." I had been working out for the past 2 months and had achieved some initial results. As for Delilah, as her belly grew bigger, her slender waist disappeared. He seemed to smell something and asked me, "Did you change your perfume?" I said casually, as if chatting, "Yeah, a friend gave it to me. He said this perfume suits me well." Damien's eyes changed for a moment, and he asked jokingly, a male friend? I didn't answer him. Just when I turned around, the smile on my mouth grew deeper. On weekends, it was Damien's day to accompany our daughter. Pearl excitedly put on her Elsa dress early in the morning, waiting for Damien to take her to the amusement park. But Damien said that he had something to do and couldn't come. Pearl kept crying and suddenly had a high fever at night. I drove alone and took her to the emergency room. I ran into Damien at the hospital. He said that Delilah wasn't feeling well and was also in the hospital. When I was holding Pearl to have the second bag of intravenous drip, Damien came over. It had been so long since the divorce, and for the first time, he said to me with a bit of guilt, Elysia, I'm sorry. You've worked hard. I looked down at Pearl, who was sleeping soundly in my arms, and tried hard to hold back my tears. What you should be sorry for is Pearl. She had been looking forward to seeing you for so many days, but you didn't come. Damien walked up to us, squatted down, and reached out to touch Pearl's face, but Pearl's body trembled a little and subconsciously burrowed deeper into my arms. Damien's hand froze there for a long time before slowly dropping down. He asked me, have you eaten? I shook my head. Then Damien's phone rang. It was Delilah calling. I don't know what she said, but Damien's face became darker and darker. Finally, as if he was annoyed by her urging, he replied perfunctorily, go to sleep first. I'll go back to accompany you after I finish the work at hand, okay? The wheel of fortune turns. In the past, when I called Damien to urge him to come home, he always used work as an excuse to put me off. But his attitude towards me wasn't as gentle as it is now. It was full of impatience between the lines. Damien hung up the phone and looked at me a bit awkwardly. Delilah wasn't like this before. I don't know if it's because of the pregnancy recently, but she's especially clingy. Don't mind it. I'll go and buy you something to eat now. No need. She's pregnant. Go back and accompany her. I can handle it here. I deliberately showed that I was considerate and generous, making Damien feel guilty towards our mother and daughter. There was even a sense of self-blame in the way he looked at me. Elysia, you seem like a different person now. I smiled. People without a harbor always have to learn to grow up. His hands hanging at his sides clenched into fists, and he avoided my direct gaze. Elysia. Someone behind Damien called my name. Damien turned around when he heard the voice and saw a man in a white coat standing there, carrying packaged lunch boxes in his hand. The male doctor is named Asher. He is 3 years younger than me and is an intern in this hospital. When he was a child, he lived at his grandmother's house. Our families were neighbors, and we grew up playing together. Later, he went abroad with his parents to study, and we lost contact. 3 months ago, he suddenly found me, and that's how we got in touch again. Tonight, the queue in the emergency department of the public hospital was just too long, and Pearl had a high fever that wouldn't go down, so I came to him. Meeting Damien here was an accident. Damien watched Asher walk around him and come to my side. The concern in his tone was hardly concealed. I went to several stores before I bought dumplings stuffed with beef. Eat them while they're hot. Seeing that it was inconvenient for me to hold the child, Asher even pretended to feed me. Damien's expression turned a bit cold, and he asked him, are you a doctor here? Asher said casually, sort of. To be precise, my family owns this whole hospital. He wasn't lying. His father is the largest shareholder of this private hospital. Damien looked at me and then at Asher and asked tentatively, what's your relationship? Asher raised his eyebrows slightly. Isn't it obvious enough? Ex-husband's brother. Hearing the words, ex-husband's brother, Damien's face seemed to have been splashed with a palette of colors. Later, Delilah called and called him away. It wasn't until Damien had walked far away that I complained, Ancestor, please be more reliable when you help others next time, okay? I almost couldn't keep up with the act. He smiled and stuffed another dumpling into my mouth. Practice makes perfect. Just do it a few more times. A week later, Pearl had fully recovered. I went back to the company to cancel my leave. When I got off work in the evening, I ran into Damien in the elevator. When other colleagues saw us, they all avoided suspicion, and in the end, only he and I were left in the elevator. The elevator was going down. I looked up at the jumping numbers on the screen. We were almost on the first floor. Damien stood beside me with his hands in his trouser pockets and asked, "Was the person you met in the hospital that day your boyfriend?" The elevator door opened. I put my bag on my shoulder. "It seems that it has nothing to do with President Damien." After saying that, I stepped out of the elevator. Damien caught up with me. "But your romantic partner will directly affect my daughter. I can't accept my daughter calling someone else daddy." I suddenly stopped in my tracks and turned around to ask him, "Why didn't you think about our daughter when you cheated? When you forced me to divorce for Delilah's sake, didn't you think that I would find another man?" Damien was left speechless. People passing by all cast strange looks at us. "Elysia." Asher appeared again just in time. He walked to my side, naturally put his arm around my shoulder, and said in a coquettish tone, "I've been waiting for you for a long time. I'm almost starving to death." He tapped the watch on his wrist and said to Damien, "It's off-duty time now. May we leave now?" Damien clenched his back teeth. Asher hugged me even tighter with an annoying smile. In front of Damien, he swaggered away with me. Asher came specifically to bring me my mother's physical examination report. Meeting Damien and me arguing was an accident. Helping me was just something he did casually. But he insisted that I treat him to a meal. There was a traffic jam on the road. When we were bored, he asked me, "What are your plans for the future? Are you going to live alone?" I shrugged. "I haven't made any plans. I'll just take it one step at a time." "What about you? You're not young anymore. Don't you have a proper date?" He pointed at me with his chin and smiled in a rascally way. "I'm on a date with you right now, aren't I?" I almost rolled my eyes to the sky. "Forget it. I can't afford a young master like you. There are several nice girls in our company. I'll introduce them to you some other day." There was a faint smile on his thin lips. "Okay." During the evening dinner rush hour, you have to wait in line for at least an hour at any restaurant. We were almost our turn. Suddenly, the department director called me, "Elysia, there's a problem with the financial statement you submitted this afternoon. It's needed for the company's regular meeting tomorrow morning. Come back to work overtime and deal with it right away." When I arrived at the company, I realized that Damien had done it on purpose. Because except for the light in his office, there wasn't a single soul in the rest of the company. The director informed me, "Elysia, take your computer to President Damien's office to make the changes, and show it to him directly after you're done." It was already past 10 o'clock in the evening. I was sitting on the sofa in Damien's office with my computer, sorting out the financial statement. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window behind me, the brilliant lights were reflected on the glass curtain walls of the high-rise buildings, like countless eyes silently watching this busy world. Damien had been sitting silently at his desk until he couldn't help but speak up. "That guy isn't suitable for you." I stopped typing on the keyboard. "Reason?" He looked at me and said, "He's too young. Delilah is younger. Men and women are different. What's the difference? Isn't it all about that kind of thing in bed?" I smiled. "Young people have better stamina and a better experience. Who wouldn't like that?" The paper documents in Damien's hand were crumpled by him. His eyes became brighter and sharper. "Have you slept with him?" I closed my computer. "The statement has been sent to President Damien's email. Remember to check it. If there's nothing else, I'll leave first." But as soon as I walked out the door, I saw a figure in a pink coat disappearing around the corner of the corridor. It was Delilah. I had seen that pink coat in the photos on her WeChat moments. So, she had heard the conversation between Damien and me just now at the door. Soon it was Pearl's birthday. Pearl had been clamoring in the video for Damien to buy her a Disney cake. So early this morning, he came to our door with a birthday cake and big and small bags of gifts and snacks. While I was preparing lunch in the kitchen, the father and daughter were building Lego blocks harmoniously in the living room. Pearl hadn't been this happy for a long time and kept giggling. When it was time to eat, she put her little hands together in front of her chest, made a wish seriously, and then blew out the candles. "Mommy, guess what wish I just made?" Pearl asked, pulling my hand. I pretended to think about it. Pearl wants Elsa's princess shoes? She shook her little head, then giggled and took my hand with one hand and Damien's with the other, pressing our hands together. I hope Mommy and Daddy can always be by my side. Looking at Pearl's innocent smiling face, I felt a pang in my heart. Damien's smile at the corner of his mouth also froze for a moment. Pearl cut the cake into 3 pieces, kept one for herself, and gave the other 2 to me and Damien. She ate with big bites, getting cream all over her mouth. But suddenly, her expression became very painful, and she started coughing violently. Pearl. I was so frightened that I immediately hugged Pearl into my arms. Pearl scratched her face, neck, and body hard with her hands. Mommy, I'm so itchy. Mommy. She started crying and became more and more out of breath as she cried. This symptom had appeared once when Pearl ate peanuts for the first time. I looked at the cake and shouted at Damien, "You knew Pearl was allergic to peanuts, yet you bought a cake with peanuts." Damien was also panicked. Delilah ordered the cake. I didn't know how this could happen. Delilah. It's Delilah again. At that moment, I wished I could kill these 2 bastards. Pearl had an allergic shock due to her severe peanut allergy and was sent to the emergency room by the doctor. While I was waiting anxiously at the door, Delilah came. She seemed to be frightened, with red eyes, and threw herself into Damien's arms. I didn't know. Husband, I really didn't know Pearl was allergic to peanuts. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Damien patted her back to comfort her. Honey, don't cry. It's not your fault. I know you didn't mean it. But I thought she did it on purpose. She clearly saw Damien and me working overtime alone that night and became jealous. I rushed forward, pulled Delilah out of Damien's arms, and slapped her hard. Delilah, if anything happens to Pearl today, I'll make you and the bastard in your belly pay with your lives. Delilah was stunned by my slap. I've already called the police. If it wasn't intentional, let the police handle it. Damien was also stunned when he saw me raise my phone. Then, he protected the sobbing Delilah behind him and pushed me hard. Elysia, are you fucking crazy like a rabid dog? Damien accused me indiscriminately. Delilah was kind-hearted and took the initiative to offer to buy a cake for Pearl. She just wanted to have a good relationship with Pearl. What's wrong with that? How could she know that Pearl was allergic to peanuts? She didn't know? I looked at Delilah hiding behind Damien. She had been pretending to cry, but the corners of her mouth were clearly turned up. Even when she heard me say I'd called the police, she didn't show the slightest panic. Because she was certain that the police had no evidence. At this time the door of the emergency room opened. Pearl was pushed out by the doctor. I hurried over. The doctor said, "The child is okay. Fortunately, she was sent here in time. You parents can't be so careless in the future. Isn't this like joking with the child's life?" I looked at the little person lying on the stretcher with red rashes all over her face and couldn't help crying with heartache. After thanking the doctor, I followed Pearl back to the ward. Damien also wanted to come along. Delilah covered her stomach and shouted that it hurt. Damien immediately took her away nervously. The moment the elevator door closed, I clenched my fists as I watched their receding figures. Pearl, Mommy will definitely avenge you. Pearl was sick for quite a few days. Delilah was only taken to the police station for questioning once and wasn't affected at all. During this period I calmed down a lot and thought clearly about how to deal with Delilah and Damien next. So the first thing I did after Pearl recovered was to take a gift to Damien. It was almost time to get off work. I took a gift box of a maternity waiting bag and entered Damien's office. He was surprised to see me. After all, during this period, I hadn't even answered his calls. "Why are you here?" he asked. I put the thing on the table and said, "I've thought about it for a long time. It was my fault that day. I was too impulsive. This is for Delilah. I'm apologizing to her. It was wrong of me to hurt her. I hope she won't hold it against me." Damien's gaze hesitated for a moment. "Is this your sincere words?" I smiled and nodded. "Of course. She's going to be a mother too. How could she harm Pearl? I was just too worried that day." I extended an invitation to Damien. Pearl said she misses Daddy. Are you busy tonight? If not, come to our home to see her. Damien was flattered. Okay. It had been a long time since our divorce. Sitting in Damien's car again felt like a lifetime had passed. I directly got into the back seat. Because there was an unpleasant smell in the passenger seat. I remember this car was bought in the year Pearl was born, I said with emotion as I noticed that some of the accessories in the car were old. How time flies. It's almost been 4 years in a blink of an eye. Damien glanced at me through the rearview mirror and recalled, yeah, when Pearl was little, her safety seat was placed in the back. I smiled and said, when Pearl was little, she used to get carsick. We would sing nursery rhymes for her and coax her all the way. It was really tiring. The beautiful memories of the past were still vivid in my mind. I pretended to raise my eyes casually and happened to meet Damien's gaze in the rearview mirror. He looked at me and his eyes became complicated for a moment. I gave him a faint smile and then naturally turned my eyes to look out of the window. The way home was familiar. The dessert shop on the street that had been open for many years was still as busy as ever. Only people's hearts had changed. When Pearl saw Damien coming, she jumped up and down with joy. However, my mother glared at Damien when she saw him. While Damien was playing with Pearl, my mother pulled me to the balcony and asked, "Are you going to make up with him?" I sneered and said, "I think he's disgusting." My mother was even more puzzled and asked, "Then why did you bring him back?" I leaned on the railing of the balcony and looked through the French window at the father and daughter who were having a great time playing in the living room. Of course, I'm repaying him in his own coin. After seeing my mother off, it was time for Pearl to go to bed. I walked up to Pearl, squatted down and coaxed her, "Shall we play with Dad again tomorrow? It's time to go to bed now." Pearl nodded obediently. When I stood up, my body suddenly swayed and I almost fell. Damien reached out in time to support me. Pearl pouted and said to him, "Mom has a cold and has been taking care of me while she's sick. She always takes a lot of medicine and often cries under the quilt in the middle of the night. Mom is really pitiful. Dad, will you stay and take care of Mom and me?" Damien's heart softened after all and he took the initiative to stay and coax the child to sleep. While Damien went to heat up the milk, Pearl took my hand and said, "Mom, did I do a great job just now?" I pinched her nose and said, "You little smarty." After Pearl drank the milk, she leaned against Damien's arms and listened to him tell stories obediently. She held Damien's hand tightly until she fell asleep. Damien was also tired and fell asleep leaning against the headboard of the bed. I stood at the door of the room, took out my mobile phone and took a picture. I didn't take Damien's whole body in the picture. Only in the lower left corner of the photo were his and Pearl's hands tightly holding each other. I deliberately posted it on Moments. The caption was, "Pearl was very happy tonight." Soon, Damien was woken up by a phone call. It was Delilah calling. Damien had to rush back home in the middle of the night, but this was just the first step of my plan, and it was far from enough. Half a month later, the company was invited to attend a fashion dinner held by our business partners. Damien and I attended it together. Many business partners of our company came to the dinner. They had been stationed abroad all year round and didn't know that Damien and I had already divorced. Some of the clients attached great importance to the attitude of the partners towards their families. So it was within my expectation that Damien invited me to be his female companion. The dinner was held in the rooftop garden. As the lights were just lit up, they illuminated the beautifully decorated open-air venue. Laughter and chatter filled the air everywhere. The carefully selected background music was like a flowing brook, creating a relaxed and pleasant atmosphere for the guests. Many acquaintances came to toast Damien and me, saying, "President Damien and Mrs. Song are still such a perfect match." We just smiled at each other and clinked glasses with them one by one. When there was no one around, Damien raised his glass to me alone and said, "Elysia, the wine-red dress you're wearing tonight really suits your complexion. It's very beautiful." I smiled and said, "Thank you." He asked me, "Why did you agree to my invitation? I thought you would refuse." I cursed silently in my heart, but when I looked up, my eyes were sincere. "I built up the company with you step by step. I don't want our personal issues to affect the development of the company. Besides, even just for the alimony you give me every month, I should come to this dinner." Damien was amused by me. I don't know if it was because of the wine, but his eyes looking at me became a bit ambiguous. "Elysia, do you know? Tonight is the happiest and most relaxing night for me in recent times." I pretended not to know and asked, "Did you quarrel with Delilah?" He looked a bit helpless and said, "Sort of." I advised him, "Pregnancy is very hard. She's 8 months pregnant now, right? I remember when I was pregnant with Pearl, the pain in my pubic bone in the 3rd trimester was so bad that I couldn't sleep all night, and my mood was also very bad. So you should understand and tolerate her more. It'll be okay when the baby is born." But he grasped the key point and asked me, "You couldn't sleep all night at that time? You never told me about these things." I replied gently and considerately, "The company was in a fierce competition at that time. You were so busy that you couldn't even have a meal every day. I didn't want to distract you." The wind blew, and I shivered and sneezed. Damien immediately took off his suit jacket and put it on my shoulders, saying, "If Delilah were half as sensible as you, it would be great." The atmosphere became more and more ambiguous. My 2 delicate eyebrows wrinkled with annoyance for a moment and then disappeared. Fortunately, someone shouted in time, "Please, everyone, come over here and take a big group photo." There were also many celebrities present at the dinner tonight. I knew that the official would definitely post the photos online for publicity. So when taking the group photo, I deliberately put on Damien's jacket, held his arm and smiled and raised my glass to the camera. Once the photo was exposed, it was immediately forwarded crazily by tens of thousands of netizens who were all cheering for their idols. Finally, it even made it to the hot search. Delilah was bound to see it. After achieving my goal, I didn't want to stay for a moment longer. I had been acting all night and my face was almost frozen from smiling. I just made up an excuse and left early. Damien was reluctant to part with me and wanted to send me home. I refused. Damien drank a lot of wine during the social engagements later. It was almost 12 o'clock when he got home. The driver helped the drunk Damien into the house and laid him flat on the living room sofa. Delilah, with a big belly, saw the driver out. When she came back to the sofa, Damien was hugging the trash can and vomiting. Instead of taking care of him, Delilah stared at him angrily and asked, "Who were you with tonight?" Damien was so drunk that he didn't pay any attention to Delilah at all. After vomiting, he just lay back on the sofa with a terrible headache. Delilah walked over, grabbed his arm and tried to wake him up. "Damien, wake up. I'm asking you. Who were you with tonight? And who did you drink with?" Damien impatiently shook off Delilah's hand, closed his eyes and muttered, "Elysia, my stomach hurts. Help me make a bowl of hangover soup." When Delilah heard this, she exploded with anger. She angrily went to the bathroom, fetched a basin of cold water and poured it all over Damien's face. When she came out, Damien shivered all over and suddenly jumped up from the sofa. Delilah threw the basin on the ground and cried, "Were you with Elysia tonight? You even called me by the wrong name." She raised her fist and hit Damien, shouting, "Do you know that you were even calling her name in your dreams a few days ago? Damien, I've been pregnant with your child for 10 months, working so hard. Is this how you treat me?" Damien sobered up a lot and his muddled thoughts gradually became clear. He looked at the crying Delilah in front of him and tried to coax her patiently. "Okay, I drank too much. What I said when drunk doesn't count. You're still pregnant. Be good and go upstairs to sleep, okay? I'll take a shower and go to accompany you." But Delilah was almost driven mad with anger. She had seen the photo on the hot search. Damien had put his jacket on Alicia's shoulders and let her hold his arm. They were so intimate. She broke down and cried and shouted, "Damien, I'm asking you a question. Answer me. Do you still miss her? Do you regret divorcing her?" Damien didn't say anything, but obviously he had lost his patience. Delilah cried even harder and said, "Do you regret marrying me? You even went to accompany her and her daughter, coaxing Pearl to sleep. You must regret it." Damien was pushed to the edge and exploded with anger. "Yes," he shouted at Delilah, "I do regret it. If Elysia were here today, she wouldn't make a big fuss like you. She would take care of me and make me a bowl of hangover soup. She would feel sorry for me and let me sleep a few more hours. Unlike you, who always want to eat this or that in the middle of the night and pester me to buy them for you. You don't care how tired I am at the company during the day at all. Delilah, I've already married you and treated you well enough. What else do you want me to do to satisfy you? Delilah was frightened. She stared with wide eyes, tears streaming down her face, and couldn't say a word for a long time. Damien had a splitting headache. He shook off Delilah's hand and said, "I'll go out to sleep tonight. You calm down by yourself." For the first time, he didn't spoil Delilah. He slammed the door and left. At 2 o'clock in the morning, it suddenly started to rain outside, and the rain was pattering against the windows. I was woken up by the noise. Feeling thirsty, I went downstairs to get some water. When I saw Damien sitting on the sofa like a drowned rat, I almost cried out in surprise. Hearing my footsteps, he looked up towards the stairs and explained to me, "I quarreled with Delilah and had nowhere to go, so I suddenly thought of coming to see you and Pearl." He looked at the key on the coffee table and said, "You still haven't changed the habit of putting the spare key on the second layer of the shoe rack at the door." That was the key I left for my mother. She always forgot to bring it when she went out. I wasn't surprised that they had quarreled. But I didn't expect that Delilah would lose her temper so quickly. I looked at him, wet all over and dejected, and continued to play the role of a virtuous woman. "I'll make you a bowl of ginger soup." Damien seemed as if he hadn't drunk ginger soup for several lifetimes. As soon as I put it on the table, without even caring that it was too hot, he quickly drank it all up and said with a bitter smile, "What a familiar taste. The ginger soup you make is still the best." I picked up the empty bowl on the table and was about to turn around and leave. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and called me anxiously, "Elysia." I didn't move. He also fell silent. After a long silence, he said dejectedly, "I regret it. If I were given another chance to start over, I definitely wouldn't divorce you." I pulled my hand out of his and looked down at him, saying, "Don't forget, you're still wearing another wedding ring on your hand. You're not qualified to say such regretful words." He grasped my wrist unwillingly again and asked, "Then what if I take it off? Elysia, would you still be willing to give each other another chance?" I calmly pulled my hand out again. "Damien, I don't answer hypothetical questions." I didn't want Damien to stay overnight. However, I caught a glimpse of a familiar red car parked not far from the window. It was Delilah's car, so I changed my mind temporarily. I asked Damien to stay in the guest room. He didn't come out all night, which was enough to make Delilah jealous and resentful. The more jealous she was, the more crazy she would become. When people are in that state and lose their rationality, they are easier to deal with. However, the next morning, Asher suddenly arrived, which I hadn't expected. Hadn't he gone abroad to participate in an exchange meeting? Why was he here? Looking at Asher, who was carrying breakfast in front of me, I stood at the door like a stone statue. Asher frowned. "Did you see a ghost? What's with that expression?" I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, Damien's voice came from behind me, "Who's here?" Then the two of them, one standing inside the door and the other at the door, looked at each other in surprise. The corner of Asher's mouth curved into a smile, and his casual expression was even more roguish than those ruffians in TV dramas. He tilted his head and whispered in my ear, "So there really is a ghost at home, Uncle Asher." Pearl, I don't know when she had come downstairs, saw Asher at the door and excitedly ran over and threw herself into his arms. When Pearl was sick last time, Asher often came to play with her at home, so they got familiar with each other and hit it off. Asher took the opportunity to hand me the breakfast. He squatted down, picked Pearl up in his arms, and said, "Uncle missed our Pearl. I couldn't wait to see you as soon as I got off the plane." While teasing Pearl, he carried her inside, looking exactly like the master of the house. "Uncle brought you a lot of toys. They're all in the trunk of the car. After we have breakfast, I'll take you to get them, okay?" Pearl clapped her hands and said, "Okay, okay." When passing by Damien, Asher said with a sarcastic smile, "Excuse me, thank you." Damien's face darkened suddenly when he saw how familiar Pearl and Asher were. This breakfast was the longest meal I had ever had. Except for Damien, everyone else had something to eat. Asher peeled an egg for me while saying to Damien, "Sorry, I didn't know there was an extra person at home, so I didn't buy yours." Damien drank the plain water in his hand and maintained his proper demeanor, saying, "It's okay. I'm not hungry." Asher shrugged indifferently, and the look in his eyes when he looked at me seemed to say that this scumbag was putting on an act again. Damien was called away by his secretary's phone call. Before leaving, he wanted to kiss Pearl, but Pearl was busy building blocks with Asher and just gave him a perfunctory flying kiss. Damien left with a cold face. It was almost noon, and I was preparing lunch in the kitchen. While Pearl was playing with puzzles, Asher sneaked in. He familiarly took a bottle of mineral water from the fridge, unscrewed it, and took a few gulps, then stood beside me with his arms crossed. He tilted his head to look at me and said, "What on earth are you up to?" I put the picked leeks into the basin and casually asked, "Why do you ask?" The corner of Asher's mouth curved slightly. "You want to take revenge on Damien. Did you let him stay overnight to anger that woman?" I rinsed the leeks and said with a smile, "What if I want to remarry?" "Impossible," Asher said firmly. "Your father abandoned you and your mother because of another woman back then. You hate cheating deeply. There's no way you'll turn back. You can't stand Damien. There's no way you'll show kindness to him." I was stunned for a moment, turned off the faucet, and turned to look at Asher. I told him about Pearl's peanut allergy on her birthday. As a mother, I can't let anyone who wants to hurt my daughter go. Asher rarely looked so serious. He looked at me for a while, then at Pearl, who was concentrating on doing the puzzle in front of the coffee table in the living room, and frowned tightly. Suddenly, he hugged me gently. "Elysia, just do whatever you want. I'll support you." Time passed quickly, and it was the end of another quarter in a blink of an eye. Starting from Monday, the entire finance department was so busy that people were running around, making all kinds of reports for the company's quarterly meeting. On the night before the quarterly meeting, we were doing the final review. It was already past 10 o'clock at night. Most of the people in the company had left, and only I, the director, and a cashier were left in the finance department. I was so sleepy, and the company's coffee machine was broken, so I had to order a cup of coffee through food delivery. However, looking at the steaming coffee, an idea suddenly popped into my mind. I looked up at Damien's office. The light was still on. He was also working overtime. So, I took a picture of the coffee and posted it on Moments with the caption, "Working overtime." Thanks to someone for the coffee, heart. Delilah would definitely think that the coffee was sent by Damien. About half an hour later, the director was about to take the reports to report to Damien, but I stopped him. "Director, let me go. Isn't your son still sick? Go home early after work." The director's eyes were full of gratitude. He handed me the folder in his hand and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Elysia." After seeing the director and the cashier off, only Damien, I, and a few colleagues from the technical department were left in the whole company. I looked at the time and estimated the time it would take for Delilah to rush to the company from home. At about the right time, I took the reports and knocked on the door of Damien's office. Damien was a bit surprised to see me and asked, "You haven't left yet?" I nodded. In the past, I would have stood opposite the desk and talked to him directly about business. But tonight, I deliberately walked around and went to his side, put the folder in front of him, and handed him a box of stomach medicine at the same time. "I heard from Secretary Lee that you had a stomachache in the evening. I bought this specially for you. Work is important, but your health is even more important." His eyes were a bit touched. He stared at the medicine box in my hand and said, "It's still the same as before. You always like to buy me the Jiangzhong brand." When reporting work to Damien, I stood very close to him, bent over, and carefully explained the data of the important parts on the report. A carefully designed glance back happened to meet his direct gaze. In this quiet office, his breathing even became heavier. "Elysia, He called me softly, "Could you please change back to your original perfume? I like your original scent better than the current one." He was the one who said he was sick of the smell before. I sneered in my heart, but remained expressionless on my face. Damien couldn't help but raise his hand to touch my face. I subconsciously wanted to dodge, but forced myself to hold back. Just when his fingertips touched my cheek, the door of the office was pushed open with a loud bang. Damien and I both turned our heads to look at the door at the same time. We saw Delilah standing at the door with disheveled hair, staring at us with a terrifying expression. Her eyes were red with anger. Without saying a word, she walked in with her belly protruding. She picked up the glass of water on the table and suddenly splashed it all over my face. I could have actually dodged it. But I deliberately didn't. Damien was so anxious that he stood up from the chair and blocked in front of me, shouting, "Delilah! What are you doing?" Delilah was so jealous that she was almost crazy. She pointed at me tremblingly and questioned Damien, "In the middle of the night, a man and a woman alone, what are you doing here?" Damien was speechless. He pointed at the reports on the table and said, "We're working." "Working? Huh? Does working require you to be so close and touch her face?" "Damien, do you think I'm a 3-year-old child and so easy to deceive?" Delilah was furious. "You haven't come home to live for several days. You don't even answer my phone calls. Isn't it all because of her?" I pretended to be a weak person and hid behind Damien, slowly wiping my face with a tissue, listening to them quarreling with each other. However, when Damien turned to look at me, I could immediately squeeze out 2 drops of aggrieved tears. "Damien, I'll leave first." I pretended to be in a fluster and fled from the office. Delilah rushed up to pull me. But Damien grabbed her. After walking out of the office door, I heard Damien say to Delilah, "Can't you just be quiet? I beg you, can you use your brain and stop doing such embarrassing things? Don't you ever consider how much impact it will have on me if others in the company see you doing this? What will others think of me?" Delilah sneered, "If you don't want others to know, don't do it yourself. You've done such shameless things. Are you still afraid of being embarrassed?" Damien was also completely angry and started to say whatever came to his mind. "I've done the most embarrassing thing in my life by marrying you. If I had known you were so unreasonable, I wouldn't have divorced Elysia in the first place." I listened to their fierce quarrel through the door, and I felt really happy in my heart. It was really worth getting splashed with that glass of water. I was caught up by Damien at the entrance of the office building. He said, "It's not easy to get a taxi at this time. Let me drive you home." I pretended to persuade him otherwise. "No need. Go back and explain it to her quickly. Don't let her misunderstand." However, Damien ignored my words and stuffed me into the passenger seat impatiently, saying, "Don't worry about her." With a bang, he slammed the car door shut forcefully. The car started and slowly drove out. From the rearview mirror, I saw Delilah, who was pregnant, chasing after us. She took off her shoes and threw them hard in the direction the car was driving, just like a shrew. She didn't look at all like the delicate and charming woman she used to be. On the way, I really didn't want to talk to Damien, so I simply pretended to be asleep. When we arrived at my home, he woke me up. I opened my eyes, said goodbye to him, and was about to get out of the car. Damien grabbed me. "Elysia, I apologize to you on Delilah's behalf for what happened tonight." "I'm sorry." I smiled and shook my head. "It's okay. She did all this because she cares about you. I can understand that." But Damien was extremely bitter. "Elysia, only now have I realized that in this world, you're the only one who's truly been nice to me. When we were together before, you always ironed my shirts and suits neatly, helped me match the clothes I was going to wear every day when I went out, and the dishes on the table were always the ones I liked. You would also make hangover soup for me when I was drunk and took care of me without taking off your clothes when I was sick. You managed everything at home in an orderly manner. But Delilah, it seems that she can't do anything except act coquettishly. My shirts are always wrinkled. She never cooks, and she doesn't even know how to make hangover soup for me. My life has become a mess." He folded his hands and leaned on the steering wheel, lowering his head heavily on it, looking extremely depressed. Elysia, I really regret it. Damien's confession might seem touching to him, but to me, it was extremely disgusting. He didn't regret it because he truly loved me. He regretted it because his life was not as good as before. If Delilah had been a caring and considerate wife, he wouldn't have thought of me at all. I seized the opportunity and deliberately said something to hint at him, but Damien, you're already married. You can't divorce her for me, can you? It's getting late. I'll go back first. I was afraid that he would pester me again, so I quickly got out of the car and walked quickly towards the house without looking back. I didn't know what Damien did to Delilah after he went back that night. But 3 days later, Delilah finally took the bait. She took the initiative to find me and invited me to a coffee shop. She no longer played the role of an innocent little white rabbit. As soon as she opened her mouth, she spoke coldly. Come on, what exactly do you want? I drank coffee leisurely, pretending not to understand. What do you mean? Delilah stared at me with her eyes wide open, looking as if she wanted to devour me. You really want Damien to divorce me, don't you? You're not that stupid. I deliberately led her on. Delilah, you brought this all on yourself. You shouldn't have, above all else, touched my pearl. Don't tell me that you didn't do it on purpose with that peanut cake. Delilah clenched her hands that were hanging down tightly and admitted frankly, yes, I did it on purpose. I tried every means to marry Damien. Wasn't it just for his money? If he had been devoted to me, that would be okay. But he still has feelings for you. He's so greedy, always thinking about others while having me. Of course, I don't feel secure. I thought, isn't Pearl the only connection between you two? What if she's gone? What else would you use to attract Damien? Besides, Pearl is also Damien's legal heir. Why should you and your daughter compete with my son for the family property? When you divorced, the house, the car, and the savings were all given to you, Elysia. You're too greedy. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Our eyes met as if a powerful current collided with sparks flying. Delilah warned me, Elysia, no matter what you do, I won't divorce Damien. I asked you to come here today just to tell you not to waste your efforts. She said somewhat proudly, to tell you the truth, I'm pregnant with a son. When my son is born, you and your daughter will be nothing. Damien likes boys so much. He won't abandon my son and me no matter what. You know the saying that a mother is honored because of her son, right? Whether it's Damien himself or his money, don't you even think about it. I put my hand into the pocket of my coat, touched the recording pen and smiled. Delilah, let's wait and see. I picked up my bag and walked out. But after taking 2 steps, I turned back. I walked up to Delilah, quickly picked up the glass of orange juice on the table and poured it over her head. This is for you. After saying that, I turned around and left gracefully. I just left Delilah shouting curses loudly behind me. I heard that not long after Delilah left the coffee shop that day, her amniotic fluid broke. She sat down on the roadside and it was kind-hearted passers-by who called an ambulance for her. She gave birth prematurely. The son she had been longing for turned out to be a daughter in the end. She was so dissatisfied that she grabbed the doctors and nurses and kept asking. Clearly, it showed a boy when I had the 4-dimensional ultrasound. Why did it become a girl? Did you do something? Did you swap my baby? Her being so unreasonable made Damien hate her even more. So during the whole confinement period, he hardly went home. I thought it was time. Compared to myself, with Damien's current status and position, it would be easier for him to deal with Delilah. I thought it was time. Compared to myself, with Damien's current status and position, it would be easier for him to deal with Delilah. So when Damien came to my home again and proposed to remarry me, I decided to lay all my cards on the table. Damien and I were sitting on the sofa in the living room. I took out the recording pen from that day and played the processed audio for him. After listening to it, Damien was indeed filled with hatred and cursed angrily, "That bitch. She said she didn't care about my money and just wanted to be with me openly. It turns out that she was lying to me all along. She was so crazy that she even wanted to harm Pearl." When he was at his angriest, I handed him the paternity test report of Delilah's daughter. Take a look at this too. The paternity test stated clearly that Delilah's daughter had no biological relationship with Damien. I had bribed the confinement nanny and asked her to secretly get a strand of the child's hair for me and then compare it with Damien's DNA. Damien's face instantly turned livid and his eyes were burning with the flames of anger as if he wanted to burn everything to ashes. He couldn't even wait for a moment and directly slammed the door and left. Damien's actions were much faster than I had expected. He threw the paternity test report in Delilah's face and forced her to divorce. Delilah refused. He simply took Delilah to court and sued for a forced divorce. He also found the clerk who made the cake for Delilah at that time. With that recording, he pursued her responsibility for trying to harm Pearl. After the trial, Delilah was found guilty of intentional injury and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. On the day Damien got the divorce certificate, he couldn't wait to come to find me. However, suddenly there was a heavy rainstorm on the way. The visibility was poor and he accidentally ran a red light and collided with a large truck. After a series of rescue efforts, he still didn't make it. It was the hospital that called to inform me that Damien wanted to see me. When I arrived at the hospital, he was already lying on the bed on the verge of death. But I didn't have the slightest bit of pity in my heart. I just told him calmly, "Damien, I came here today to make sure you understand before you die. Actually, I never thought of remarrying you. Everything I did was to take back what should have belonged to me. You deserve this end." Damien's hands tightly grasped the bed sheet. Tears slid down his cheeks and he was murmuring something softly. I couldn't hear it. But the unwillingness and resentment in his eyes were really satisfying. I smiled even more happily. Both of your parents are dead. Now the only legal heir left is Pearl. Everything you were proud of has finally fallen into my hands. Damien couldn't close his eyes until he died. I clearly remember that the sky was especially blue that day with white clouds curling up like a beautiful painting. When I walked out of the hospital, I felt so relieved that even breathing seemed pleasant. Extra story, Asher 1 year later. On February 14th, Valentine's Day. Asher came to pick me up after work and we went to have hot pot. When we came out of the shopping mall, snowflakes began to float outside, which was so romantic and warm. He put his white scarf around my neck and curled the corners of his mouth. "We're so full. How about taking a walk?" I nodded and said, "Okay." The ground was covered with white snow, looking so clean. Most of the pedestrians on the road were couples. They held hands laughing and playing. There were also some small vendors holding single roses wrapped up in their hands, approaching each couple to sell them. When we got closer, someone also came over and asked, "Sir, would you like to buy a rose for your girlfriend? It's cheap, 15 yuan each." I hesitated and wanted to explain, "Well, we're not." But before I could finish my sentence, Asher directly scanned the QR code to pay and gave me a rose. Then neither of us said anything and continued walking side by side. The atmosphere was somewhat subtly ambiguous. When we were standing at the intersection waiting for the traffic light, the cake shop on the street started playing music. It was Zhang Liangying's song, "Finally Waiting for You." When the lyrics sang, "Finally waiting for you," fortunately I didn't give up. The couples beside us looked at each other sweetly, cuddling up to each other happily. Asher and I were standing among them. Infected by this loving atmosphere, the hands hanging on our sides also seemed to touch each other faintly. Each touch was like an electric current piercing through my body and mind. My cheeks were burning hot. I swallowed nervously and tried my best to look into the distance, not daring to look back at him at all. When the green light came on, I took a step and continued walking forward. Asher stopped where he was and called me, "Elysia." I turned around. I saw him standing in the heavy snow that was floating all over the sky, taking out an old pink bow hairpin from the pocket of his coat and laying it in the palm of his hand. "I bought this for you 15 years ago. He deliberately elongated his tone, creating a soft atmosphere. "Give me a chance. Let me put it on for you with my own hands, okay? I'm serious." I looked at his slightly messy bangs on his forehead, his handsome and clearly defined face, and couldn't help smiling in his breath. Okay,